Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Vince and I continue our conversation about the Wall Street Journal article, "Colleges Spend Like There's No Tomorrow. These colleges devour money." Our Speakpipe question is from a mom who is hearing that generative AI will make the college essay obsolete. Our interview is part 3 of 4, my interview with Ron Lieber, the lead money columnist for the New York Times, where we discuss tough questions about paying for college. And we close out with the final part of Linda taking the lead and being joined by Lisa to discuss Rice University for our spotlight. And so the question always to me is that whole thing, what's the saying, what came first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing? Like, is it the schools did outlandish, irresponsible spending, and then they had to pass the cost on to the consumer? Or is it the consumer demanded, if you don't give me these amenities, I'll take my butt elsewhere? Because I see some other places on my college list that are giving me the amenities that I want. And then the school comes back and says, we got to upgrade our food. People don't like it. We got to upgrade our dorms. We got to upgrade our athletic program. We're not winning enough. We got to pay more on a better coach. We got to, then the coach says, I need a multi-million-dollar practice facilities and blah, blah, blah. And it kind of just keeps going on and on and on. And so that's kind of where my mind went with this article is, to what degree is this just what the public wants and schools are giving the public what they want? I don't know the answer. I certainly don't want to take responsibility away and say that the problem with that reasoning too much is then nobody's ever held accountable and there's no such thing as anything being extreme. You just say sort of like an excuse for everything.
Right.
There's another argument that goes in a different direction, which says, show me your budget and I'll show, and you reveal to me your values. I mean, that was the whole Malcolm Gladwell food fight podcast that he did with Bowdoin versus Vassar. It was like Bowdoin's putting their money in the lobsters and all that to court students, and Vassar's going for a more Spartan existence, but throwing, a much higher percentage of their operating budget into need-based financial aid. And he threw down on that podcast. If you haven't heard it, just look up Malcolm Gladwell, Bowdoin versus Vassar. He was a little rough on Bowdoin for my taste, but he made a point in his compelling way. So what are your thoughts on what I said?
I think that the marketplace doesn't necessarily drive what the expectation is. I think it's the other way around. And I think about it in terms of the way that we see social media. Nobody was looking for email. Nobody knew it didn't exist. You have these ways to communicate and advertise to the world what people need. And all of a sudden it becomes something that we need. So in some ways, I feel that you have presidents and trustees that sort of set these goals, and the university is going to become this. But in order to get to that place, they just start spending. And because there's such a poor lack of accountability at the numbers, like they talk about in the article, how nobody nobody runs a corporation like they run universities, like these big PowerPoints that have no information, there's no accountability. And before you know it, these goals were so expensive that the only way they could cover the cost was if you look at for every dollar lost from state and federal money that was coming in beginning before the 70s, when the federal government started to pull back the amount of aid that they were giving students and states. For every dollar lost, their colleges now are charging $2.40 more, and they're more than making up for the dollar. They keep increasing what they're bringing in. It's not just covering costs, but they're making a ton of money. But there's so many, the checks and balances are off. And I think that the colleges, from the way that I see it, like email, like technology, I feel like colleges are telling us what we need, and the consumers are responding to that because they're evaluating every college now by, opportunities and amenities and sort of lushness of opportunity, I think.
I think I see it a little different. And maybe that's because, like, when I was at boarding school, I was over our surveys.
Mm-hmm.
So I was over refusal surveys, designing them and administering them and presenting the data. So refusal survey is like why somebody didn't pick you and they picked somebody else. And so I remember having a meeting with the business manager because one year, more than a few people complained about the food.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember sitting down with the business manager and saying, what can we do about this? Because we're losing kids over this. And I remember saying, we could do something. It's just a matter of shifting. We put an extra $1 million into that. It's just a matter of shifting money. If I hear from the right people, then, you're taking from something else to invest in that. And I know for a while when our athletic programs weren't doing well, we would speak out about that a lot.
Right.
Like, we feel like we're losing kids because our such and such program isn't strong enough. And then that, that stuff, you speak out enough and then stuff sometimes gets done. And so I think that people don't just go out on a limb and do extravagant projects without somebody this is just my experience, and I know it can be different in different places, without hearing from somebody like, we're losing kids because our football team never wins. We need to do something about it. And you hear from that enough, and then you start allocating money there. And then sometimes you realize I'm in over my head because I spent crazy amounts and we never got the ROI. Or I think like what you said sort of makes sense to me initially. There was no such thing as email until it was here. But to me, in a college context, when it's so competitive and people are visiting a lot of schools, I think a lot of people are comparing to like the dorms to what they saw or the campus look. Like there's a lot of places you spend money. Like I was talking to the other day and they said the deferred maintenance of that place, blah, 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 blah. You hear that a few enough times. Okay, we need to invest in our lawn care and our landscaping and the buildings and all that. Like, I think the standard has just gotten out of control and now people want everything. And everything is really expensive. Yeah. Everything is big time athletics, winning programs. That means even more money you got to spend on coaches and facilities and all that, because coaches are going to come in if got to give me a practice facility and got to have turf and I see what Michigan State spends. It's ridiculous. Not to mention the fact that our coach has a 10-year, $85 million contract. Student centers, food, dorms. Not to mention the other things I said, like, I just gave 3 examples, but different forms of student support, academic support, career support. All these things cost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's so competitive out there. Like if your competitor's doing it, people feel like they need to do it. But I don't think they just automatically think that I need to do it because my competitor's doing it. I think they need to do that because this, Vince, as much or more than I do. When you're in admissions, like your audience is people outside the school, not inside. The faculty in the minute, they serve as people inside, but you're working with people outside. So you hear all of the reasons all the time why they're picking your competitor.
Right.
And when you start feeling like I'm losing kids over fill in the blank, well, it could be anything. Dorms, food, we're not offering this foreign language, like it could be curriculum programming things. Why don't we have business? Why don't we have engineering? Why don't we have nursing? Why don't we have, you start hearing we don't have these things, and then you clamor loud enough, and then stuff gets done. But at the same time, I appreciate you not wanting to just let people off the hook and just sort of say, you take my rationale to the nth degree and there's no accountability and everything just gets justified. So somehow there's a balance there.
Yeah, and I think what the Wall Street Journal was pointing out wisely is that we need to find the balance, because what it leads to, and what's interesting is what happened in West Virginia happened after this article came out. They're cutting programs because they were spending money on stuff that didn't need to be spent on. And that is, West Virginia is a very poor state. And they were creating, Taj Mahal, when in reality, maybe the residents of West Virginia didn't need Taj Mahal. They needed a strong flagship university, but one that, if I want to study Arabic, they didn't cut the whole language program. Goodbye.
Point well taken. And I'm kind of thinking out loud as we talk. And I guess this is just where my mind is thinking. If you're going to go with this stuff, and this stuff is a very general term for doing expensive things. That's what I'm calling this stuff.
Yeah.
And that could be anything from adding an academic program to beefing up your student center or whatever it is. If you're going to do expensive stuff, you need to do the research to know that the support is there for it and people value it enough to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
If you do expensive stuff and you're hung out to dry, that's on you, because that's the equivalent of somebody put all their life savings into a restaurant and they never did any research and they opened up in a really bad location. I feel bad for you. I feel terrible for you, but you didn't do your homework.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I'm coming down. But I'm also do want educational institutions to be educational institutions, and I don't want the tail to always wag the dog and let the consumer drive everything. There is a point where you say, we believe in, let's just say, foreign languages, and we're not going to cut the languages. Or you can mention anything else that you think is indispensable to quality education. Could be an advising system. We're not cutting the advisors, or we're not cutting, just go down the list, mental health staff. We're going to beef it up. And we're not just going to let you dictate that you'd rather turn the sports center into an arcade and a palace with skateboarding and everything else because that's what you want, because we're an educational institution and we want people to come and graduate from here to have a certain level of education. So yeah, I'm not advocating for just crass consumerism and let the consumer drive everything. There does have to be a point where these are our values. Our budget will be reflected in our values. You could have the same argument about need-based financial aid.
Right, right.
That's a core value that you believe in socioeconomic diversity. You believe in the ability of education to, categorically change the whole pathway of a family's career destiny over multi-generations. And you're going to make that investment where somebody else is saying, and this has come up before because this little kept secret. People that pay the full price are subsidizing those who get need-based financial aid.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't like it. Why am I paying for you? And so that's a core value that you have as an institution. You have to stand up to wealthy full pay family that says that and says, because you'll get a better education because we won't have a homogeneous learning environment. And that's our core value. And I've seen some people shrink in that environment when they get that pressure and they buckle. Then I see others that stand on their conviction. So there is definitely a place for these are our core values, and we're not compromising, and we're not just going to turn the whole place into a cruise ship.
Yes.
But then there's also a place where you're, if you completely turn a blind ear to constant complaints from, there is an aspect of the fact that you're part of your constituency you have to serve. And if you just completely ignore, incessant complaints, you're not listening, and you may be a dinosaur, and you may do so at your own peril.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What was the other article that I didn't read that you read, that you mentioned just before we hopped on the air, that you thought was a good follow-up article on this one? Like, what points did it make?
I think one thing that I would also say is, and I think you're right on target, Mark, is that, what are our values? And if the values are we serve the citizens of our state, well, I think one of the values down the road is we're thinking about their educational trajectory, creating lifelong learners, but also at what point are we willing to make college affordable for low income, middle income, and not just keep, if you're losing $1 from the state and the federal government, why are you getting $2.40 back? Where's the accountability and what you're spending?
Especially if you're mission focused.
Yes, mission focused for sure. So the article, so they got so much feedback from from readers in the Wall Street Journal. On August 15th, they published a new article to respond to all of the questions that came up. And apparently a lot of trustees contacted the Wall Street Journal looking for more information about their flagship institutions that they were representing. So more financial information. So
was the feedback critical? Like, was it accusing them of inaccuracies, or was it accusing them of advocating for something they shouldn't be advocating for?
So it was not inaccuracies, but trying to say colleges, the trustees and the people who responded to the article, they're urged to produce better information on how they spend the money. So part of the last part of the article spent a lot of time on smoke and mirrors. We don't have accurate information. We can't decide what our values are if I can't see the numbers. And I don't run a company like this. How do you expect us to run these amazing educational institutions with poor information? So that article, the response to it was just providing some of that feedback, and that, one of the surest ways, I think to my students, and I remember when I was working with some twins long ago, and they were really motivated by trying to reduce gun violence in the city of Los Angeles. So they were able to get a bill that passed in the city of Los Angeles, and it almost passed in the state of California. But if anyone wants to pass a bill that will surely pass and have a big impact, is just can we pass some laws that require public universities to produce standard information that's viewable by the public, that lawmakers can then make good policy on, trustees can make policy on. That's kind of the call. So I think if a student did that would be a great law to pass.
Yeah.
And Biden would, or any candidate could make, part of the forum is like, let's make universities better. Let's make our public flagships better. Let's get better information about what they're spending so we can make better decisions, and not make $2.40 or $1.40 for every dollar we lose. We keep getting richer.
Point well taken. Listen, keep sending these great articles, man. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. I look forward to you next month.
I can't wait.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, our Speakpipe questions from a mom from New Jersey, and she wants to know if generative AI will make the college essay obsolete. The next voice you will hear is our mom from New Jersey.
Hi, I'm a mom from New Jersey, and I work in the tech field, so I hear a lot every day about AI and generative AI. And a lot of the podcasts that I listen to that are not about college admissions are talking about the fact that with generative AI, we have to obviously teach kids differently, but also we should assume that anything they have written will have been aided by generative AI. So the question is the college essay on the application going away? A bunch of these podcasts have said that it is, but of course, they're not higher ed experts. I would love to hear from you. Thanks.
Friends, just like with last week, we have a special guest, Hillary Dickman from Colorado College Admission Office. And she's going to answer the question that the mom from New Jersey just asked.
Hello, YCBK team. This is Hillary from Colorado College. Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity to answer this question about essays and AI. So we would say that any new technology in admission presents challenges and upsets the status quo, and we will inevitably have to adapt our review process over time as student writing behavior changes. But it sounds like the heart of the question was, are essays going away? And my experience in admission thus far tells me that things generally tend to change quite slowly in admission, and that someone who's listening to your podcast for students applying in the next 2 or 3 years probably doesn't need to worry much about essays going away, at least not while it's still relevant to them. However, I would encourage them to look at the generative AI policies or advice of each college that they're applying to. I just saw a video from the dean of the University of Michigan Law School talking about how they don't want law school applicants using any kind of AI in their essays. And I think that is quite different from the approach that some undergraduate colleges are taking, where we assume that students are going to use AI for brainstorming or maybe for proofreading. And we think that's an appropriate use of AI, but we want them to do the bulk of the writing independently because we want to hear their voice. I hope that helps. Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity to answer this question.
Thank you, Hillary, for another insightful answer. Friends, I'd be very surprised if college admissions essay is obsolete in my lifetime. One of my favorite admission quotes comes from Janet Rappley, who served as Dean of Admission at Princeton for 15 years until 2018. Dean Rappley said, "How you write is a reflection of how you think, and how you think is very important to us." I think you'll see a lot of creative iterations and verifications on the essay. A few days ago, I was helping a student with their Princeton application, and Princeton requires a graded writing sample. So we were reviewing past grading writing samples that she had. Rather than jettison the essay, a school can require a graded writing sample so they can compare how you wrote when they know nobody doctored it and looked it over and massaged it versus what you're submitting and see if there's incongruities. Or they can recommend a graded writing sample or make it optional. I realize colleges are very reluctant to make it harder to apply lest they get less applicants. And I can say unequivocally that when you do make it harder to apply, you do get less applications, which often makes something like a graded writing sample requirement dead on arrival for all but the most selective schools. But that's just one of many examples of how a college can have some quality control without completely abandoning the essay. None of us knows the future, but personally, I'd be surprised if we see the college essay becoming obsolete. Just like, even with all the test optional movement, I'd still be very surprised to see the SAT or the ACT just get abandoned 100% wholeheartedly.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, this is the third part of what's a 4-part interview with Ron Lieber. And in part 3, Ron and I talk about net price calculators. Can you trust them? Ron and I discuss the difference between being need aware and need blind in admissions. Ron discusses front-loading grants. And Ron is asked, why is the cost of college so high? What's the reason for this? Listen and enjoy. And I want to shout out somebody right now for transparency, Jim Bach, over Swarthmore's office. I have heard him say this. He's one of the few people I've heard. He's one of the few people that I've heard say two things somebody said to him at a HECA conference, you're not one of these schools that uses demonstrated interest, are you? And he said, of course we use demonstrated interest. What do you think early decision rounds 1 and 2 are? And that's always been a pet peeve of mine. I just got back from a session with Rice, WashU, Emory, Pomona, and Cornell, all of whom said we don't use demonstrated interest. And 4 of the 5 have 2 rounds of early decision, which is the ultimate form of demonstrated interest. So shout out to Jim. I know you like that. I know you like transparency and full disclosure. I've learned that about you, Ron. But here's the second thing Jim Bach said. Net price calculators are very lousy when you own a business. They're just not that accurate if you own a business or you own a farm. And so if you own a business or you own a farm, there's a good chance it's not going to be accurate because there are going to be aspects of things that were tax breaks that we don't legitimately think are, and we're going to add in some untaxed income. And some people would go so far as to say in divorce situations as well. So you need to put out those warnings, and at least you need to do that. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Well, what I'm doing right now while I talk to you is looking at the Swarthmore net price calculator. Oh, and look at this. What if my family has business income or other special financial circumstances? We know that no family is average. The calculator, Unfortunately, the net price calculator will not produce accurate results if your parents have self-employment income. That is spectacular. Shout out to Jim Bach, for saying so.
Yeah, because we know how rare that is. That's like incredibly rare, isn't it? You just don't see that. It's really rare.
Mm-hmm. Now, what I wish is that the next Q in the Q&A was, given that net price calculators aren't any good for people with self-employment income, can I call you up before I apply and have you, give me an estimate based on, the business income or tax returns, and that there would just be a one-word answer that says yes. But that's not the next question, and that's not the next answer.
I hear you.
Even though that is a extremely resource-rich institution with, by comparison, not a completely insane number of applicants, particularly in the early decision route.
Well, you're good. There was no talk with Ron and I about me mentioning Jim Bach, and he just pulled that up on the fly, on the spot, didn't miss a second, as if that was in the script. So consider me impressed with that.
That's what they pay me for.
There you go. Let's go on to something else that you have talked about. You've been critical of schools that are need aware and hide this. You've praised schools like Oberlin that have been transparent about their need aware policies. Can you define need aware for any of our listeners who are new and not familiar with the term? And can you tell our listeners how they can find out if a school is truly need aware or need blind?
Sure. So need aware means that there's a chance that you won't get in if you need financial aid. And when put head for head against somebody who's going to be full pay, all things being equal, the applicant who could pay the tuition in full will have an advantage. And some schools are more need aware than others, but that's how you define it. And life would be a lot easier for applicants if schools just said on their admissions page, are you need aware? Yes or no? And then maybe something to the effect of, well, how need aware are you? Because some schools have come, right onto the record when I've written about this, and it's been a while, but, some schools have come right onto the record and said, well, for the first 80% of admits, we're need blind. So we're not even looking at whether somebody has need. We're just taking the students who we think would, be best here. But then at a certain point, we run out of budget. And that's the point, or we start to run out of budget, or we're coming close. And that's when we need to be more careful about making sure we can keep the lights on. And, I have every sympathy for that. Just tell us, right? No harm comes from telling us.
Yeah, I think a lot of schools, especially some of the wealthier ones like the Wesleyans and the Haverfords, would say, look, we're maybe need aware for 4% of our population. They just exactly what you said. We read need blind, and then we get the report back that says you're $800,000 over budget, and now we have a decision to make. Wesleyan told me they look at their predictive modeling numbers, and they're more likely to take kids who they're likely to yield. Others will waitlist the largest awards. Well, who's got the super like Lafayette? Who's got the super large awards? And that's the way we can get to our budget. And then others will look at, well, who were the lowest rated kids in our rating system? Let's cut the kids that just barely made it and let's keep the high flyers. And so everybody's a little different with how they administer need aware. But your point being, you don't see a lot of transparency with people either telling you how they're need aware, or is it also that you don't see a lot of transparency with even telling you if they're need aware? Is it both and?
It's really both, but I would settle for a straight up yes or no answer. I think, if I'm working in one of these shops, though, I want to explain myself, which is why, I'm fond of the schools that actually sort of define the term and try to give people some sense of how it works. Look, I get that it's the danger in being completely transparent and explaining yourself at length is that low income people won't apply, or you'll scare some lower income people off. And I all I can say is that another way to scare low income people off is not to talk about money on your website.
Well said. Well said. So let's talk about another practice that you don't hear a lot about, but occasionally it surfaces itself, oftentimes known as front-loading the grants. As you know, this is the idea of giving a more generous aid award in year one, and then in subsequent years, that aid award oftentimes is not as good as it was in the first year, but you incentivized them, you got them in, and now the switching costs and the hassle could be a pain. How can a student or family know if a college engages in front-loading the grants?
If this is something that you are already aware of, right, the potential of this as an applicant, there is no harm in asking ahead of time, or certainly asking after you've gotten the award, is the formula going to change, and is the grant going to change even if our household circumstances do not? So, you can go in all aggressive and say, hey, is this front loaded? And, somebody might take offense to that. Or you can just say, on the need-based aid, you can say, hey, if these numbers look exactly the same next year, will the size of the grant remain the same, or will it go up proportionally with inflation if our income doesn't go up? And then you have your answer, right? Maybe even better to do it via email, so you have it in writing, right? So the person answering kind of knows that you're serious. With merit aid, usually you have a sense ahead of time, that the discounts are renewable for all 4 years, usually it's the same amount. So you might be paying more out of pocket, but the merit grant stays the same as long as your GPA is good enough.
It's a tricky question because I've heard some people say, go to Section H of the Common Data Set, look at the average first year merit award versus the average award for the whole class, and if there's a difference between the first year and the average student, then they're the school's front loading the grants. But the problem with that is merit scholarships are included in that, right? It's merit aid, then need-based aid. And a lot of merit scholarships have a GPA that you need to hit. They're usually transparent with it, 3.0, 3.3, 2.5, 2.8, or whatever. And if certain people are losing merit scholarships because they don't, achieve the usually clearly explicit GPA metric, then it is going to go down from one year to the next. So I've heard some people say, just look at that Section H of the Common Data Set and compare the average freshman award to the overall award. But it's just that's a really complicated thing to suss out and to know who's doing it and who's not, just from my experience.
Yeah. And if you're looking at merit alone, year one versus 4 years, there may be ways in which the marketplace has changed, particularly if some of those marketplace years where, the awards were higher or lower happened to happen during a global pandemic.
That's
which,
a good point.
Is encompassed in everybody's 4-year data right now. And, it's certainly the case that some schools can improve, their standing in the marketplace or the opposite over the course of 2 or 3 years, which means, merit goes up or merit goes down as the school goes up or the school goes down. So, it's tougher. But there is absolutely nothing wrong, with going to a school on April 2nd or February 2nd, if you've got an offer in hand, but before you commit and say, I'm worried about how this might change over time. even if the circumstances do not change, right? The kid stays an A student, the household has the same level of earnings and assets. What are the circumstances under which the award might go down by a lot? Are there any? Does that happen, right? These are, I don't know if I'd use the same tone of voice as I just used, but these are reasonable questions. We are applicants. We are not supplicants.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Today's recommended resource, the September 20, 2023 episode from the Daily podcast is College Worth It. In this episode, host Michael Barbero interviews Paul Tough, author of the books The Inequality Machine, How College Divides Us, and How Children Succeed. Their conversation delves into the changing perspectives among many Americans who no longer believe in the value of a college education. They cover the difference between the college wage premium and the college wealth premium. In other words, is a college degree worth it over the long term once you factor in how much you're spending and how much you owe? They discuss how the type of school you attend and your chosen major can have a significant impact on these equations. They also explore the cultural and political shifts causing negative sentiments towards higher education. This is an episode we think our listeners will find valuable, and you can find it on your favorite podcast platform. The Daily is College Worth It, aired September 20, 2023.
So here's a deep one for you, Ron. As we know, the cost of college has gotten out of control. We know that last I checked, student loan debt, it's either right at 1.8 trillion or it's like knocking on the door of that. We know that's higher than credit card debt. We know that's higher than car loans, second only to mortgages, right? And and it never used to be higher than credit card or car loans. And so, and we know in some cases the cost of college has been going up even higher than healthcare. And there are a lot of theories why college costs have ballooned out of control. Some of the ones I frequently hear are states and the federal government sort of reducing their commitment to invest in families and walking away from state appropriations, whether they want to put it in K-12 or pensions or roads, bridges, whatever, but walking away from making that investment, federal Pell Grant, FSEOG, and then state appropriations. We all know states that are giving a fraction. I mean, I was at CU Boulder in July of 2022, and only 4.9% of the cost is being covered by the states. So that's one of the reasons. And then another reason is administrative bloat. There's a lot of talk that schools just keep adding more and more and more administrators or programs. Whether it's just administrative levels or it's like beefing up your career center, or beefing up your mental health, or beefing up your academic supports, or just adding administrators. And then others talk about the unlimited stream of loans that the federal government provides through things like Parent Plus on the parent side, or on the grad side, being able to borrow up to the cost of attendance for things like dental school and med school and grad plus loans and unsubsidized loans. And then others talk about the facilities race and building the biggest dorms and investing massive amounts in things like football and things like that. When I know you've looked at this as a money guy, what are the main reasons why the cost of college is out of control and we've got a crazy $1.8 trillion in student debt?
Yeah, so I think there's some truth in a lot of the explanations you offer up. One thing I would just say quickly about the student loan debt volume is that a pretty good chunk of that is from graduate school. So, we're talking about undergrad here for the most part.
Sure.
The fact that a parent can, in most instances, get a plus loan for the entire amount of the cost of attendance over 4 years with not much underwriting is insane.
That really is insane.
But I don't know that that's a driver of higher costs at most schools. There are some private colleges that lean more heavily on plus loans for their revenues than others, but I'm not sure that is overwhelmingly contributing to the overall cost. Now, let's remember, right, that the net price that families pay on average actually hasn't gone up all that much when you adjust for inflation on average. But because, many people focus on the 100 most rejected schools in America, those institutions are getting more each year. So here, I actually want to point the finger at my readers and at my peers as fellow parents, right? And I want to speak on behalf of schools who don't feel like they can say the following in polite company. We parents, for better or for worse, want our kids to live and attend school, for the most part, not everybody agrees with this, in the manner to which they have become accustomed. And many kids have their own bathrooms, many more than did a generation ago. Many kids, most of them, in fact, walk around with this beautiful little computer in their hands that does things that were unimaginable for you and me 20 or 30 years ago, or whenever it was when you were a kid. I don't want to age you too much.
Well, I'm in my 50s and I have you beat. There you go.
All right. So, the stuff that we did and did not have access to on campus 30 years ago, it's just a lot different, right? The consumer wants really good food. The consumer wants really good technology. The consumer wants and should get really excellent mental health care. The consumer wants and should get career counseling that's way better than what you and I got back in our day. The consumer wants, the consumer wants, but definitely does not need, better, more amenity-rich dorms. And all of that stuff costs money. And the fact of the matter is that the marketplace and the markets, right, support the revenue dollars that the marketplace supports. So, for all of the complaints about amenity this and cost that and price that, one really unique and maybe even beautiful thing about the American system is that we do have a lot of choice. And if there was a groundswell, for a cut rate product for 18-year-olds, somebody would show up to fill it. But isn't it interesting? Isn't it fascinating that there have been effectively no new undergraduate startups in the time that you and I have been grown-ups, right? If something was wrong with the marketplace, and if stuff was too expensive, wouldn't we have seen that by now? I think so.
I think you're bringing a really important point up. And David Marcus, who wrote the writer of the book Acceptance, he brought this point up as well when I had him on the podcast. Yeah, I'm going to partly translate what I heard you say, and you can correct it if I don't get it right. But if you want the Ritz-Carlton of the Four Seasons, you can't expect to pay Motel 6 prices. And a lot of people want the Ritz-Carlton in the Four Seasons, but they still want to pay Motel 6 prices. Is that in essence of what you're saying?
Over the weekend, somebody sent me a photo from one of those signature flight support parts of the airport where the private jets come and go. So I got my hands on an image, and they've got magazine racks there of free magazines that you can take on your private jet ride. There were these like fancy high-end hunting magazines and, magazines about, about fractional ownership of airplanes. And then there was a photo of a brochure for High Point University.
I'm sure. Did they show the steakhouse and all the?
Yeah. Right.
The steakhouses. So they're adding their third one.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, is that the Ritz-Carlton or the Four Seasons? I would actually make the case that most most parents don't want their kids in the Four Seasons or the Ritz-Carlton, but they do want them, in the Marriott, right? The Hyatt, right? Those places are comfortable. The food keeps getting better at a lot of those places. The gyms are nicer than they were a generation ago. And so, I agree with that, right? We need to look in the mirror.
And I think you're probably also saying, like, you could go to community college for 2 years and transfer into a place if you really want to do that, but you're making some choices as a consumer, and you need to bear some of the responsibility of that. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and and I'm not saying that anybody who makes the choice to send their kid to High Point or to send their kid to a Marriott of higher education is doing it wrong, right?
Friends, hopefully you enjoyed the third part of what's a 4-part interview with Ron Lieber. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, if you missed last week's first part of Linda and Lisa talking about Rice University, strongly recommend you go back and listen to part 1. And before we play part 2, Linda and Lisa recorded a supplemental statement. And the next voice you'll hear will be Linda and Lisa, the transitional statement about Rice.
Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Linda. How's it going?
It's going well, and I really appreciate you coming back to talk with me on spur of the notice, but the most YCBK thing happened to me this morning. And I just have to share. So I was out for my morning walk down by the river, enjoying the fresh air before it gets too hot. And I got a text from a dad of a student with a question about the business major at Rice University, which seemed kind of out of context, especially early in the morning. And yeah, they have a major as of a couple of years ago. It's relatively new. And that was the end of it. And I thought that is kind of odd, but I'm on my walk. And about 20 minutes later, I get to the part of the podcast where I say, you asked me a question about the business major. And I say, no, they don't have a business major. Well, Rice University really does have a business major. As my student's dad knew and texted me this morning and was probably like, what are you talking about? And I misspoke on the first part of our college spotlight because Rice University does have a major for business, and that's as of about 2021, which is honestly the time that my daughter was looking at the school. And I knew this, so I'm not sure what was happening during our conversation.
I think it was the ghost, Linda. He confused you on purpose.
I'm willing to blame it on the ghost. I am totally okay with that. I could say it was early in the morning because I do my best work between 2 and 2:30. But anyway, Rice University absolutely does have a business major. It is relatively new, and they offer concentrations in finance or management. So please, if I have given anyone the false understanding that they don't have a business major, they do in fact have one.
Well, that's great. And it's great to know that the kids of Rice have all the options.
They do. And thank you to the YCBK family for keeping us on our toes. I really appreciate those text messages. And thanks for joining me, Lisa. Just set the
my
record
pleasure.
straight.
It's straight now.
Yeah. Yay. Thanks. Sports is a big deal here. So they are a Division I team, and they are like one of the smallest D1 schools in NCAA. They have 14 teams, with basketball and women's soccer being really popular. They had 2 athletes in the Summer Olympics.
Cool.
And they also have, probably not surprisingly, one of the highest graduation rates for athletes in the NCAA. Students get to go to all home games for free. They also have 27 club sports. They are the Rice Owls. And I think this is telling. The Rice football stadium has seating for 47,000, but can be configured for up to 70,000. I mean, this is a student body, even with graduate programs, is under 9,000. I mean, that's a really big stadium.
Yeah. Yeah. Does it get filled up? I wonder. I don't know.
I can't imagine it gets that filled up with students, but sports are a big deal at the school. Fun fact about that stadium, that is where Kennedy gave the moonshot speech back in 62. So we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Yeah. I was just reading that speech over again. I'm like, now looking at this, I question a lot of the logic here. That's okay. Another discussion for another time.
Don't ruin that for me, Lisa. So, and that just kind of reinforces, I mean, that connection with NASA and Houston and Rice University. It is definitely strong. So here is another place where Rice really kind of walks the walk, is the Rice investment. So this is always one of the top value among private universities, according to Princeton, the Princeton Review, Kiplinger, Pay Scale. It is an affordable college for students with need, and 54% of students do receive aid. Now, the cost of attendance is about $78,000, but the average freshman aid package is more than $57,000. And the average responsibility for families receiving aid is less than $21,000. It's need blind for domestic applicants, and they define domestic applicants as U.S. citizens, permanent residents, DACA students, and undocumented students who have been here for a number of years. They meet 100% of need for international students, but for international, they are need aware. And the school, for their packages, they're loan free. So they're not giving you financial aid that needs to be paid back. The Rice investment means that for families with income of $75,000 or below, you are getting full tuition, fees, room and board. $75,000 to $140,000, full tuition, and $140,000 to $200,000, half tuition. So families that are out there thinking that they won't qualify for any need, that they're going to fall into that donut hole, Rice would be a school that you could definitely take a look at. They do require the FAFSA and the CSS profile. They're a QuestBridge school, and they also have merit. So merit application is considered when you apply. So there's no additional paperwork to fill out. And about 20% of the students do receive some merit. And that can go all the way up to full tuition. And they do not evaluate merit awards differently for regular decision or early decision students. And you'll get those merit awards with your acceptance notice, which is really nice. You don't get accepted and then have to wait, a few months to figure it out. They are also generous with AP credit. So students who come in with AP classes, you have to have a 4 or 5, and they don't all transfer, and they may not transfer for what you want. But as you know, a lot of these really competitive schools don't give any credit. So they do have credit for AP classes and also for IB diplomas if they have scores of 6s or 7s on their higher level exams. When you apply to Rice, what they are looking for are students with intellectual curiosity. You got to be strong academically, because even though this is a really friendly, welcoming school, these kids are smart and they come with the goods. And these classes are rigorous, and they want to see that you can handle that rigor. So they're really going to be looking at your transcript. They want to see what kind of impact you have had on your community. What did you do in high school? And they do consider demonstrated interest. So they want to see that you understand what rice is about and that you actually want to be there. So they're really going to be looking hard at your essays. The best way to show demonstrated interest, according to Rice, is visit in person or virtual. And they make it easy for virtual visits. They have a lot of space available. I'm starting to notice that some schools are backing away from, and that makes me sad. It was so great during
No, it
the
really gives
pandemic.
access. And like
Yes.
they'll have them at weird times, like 2 o'clock in the
Yes.
afternoon. Like no kid can, unless they can get like a pass out of their classes, can go to it. So
Yeah.
it sort of makes it really, it raises the bar for accessing that information.
Yes, I had hoped that that was something that would stay as a leftover from the pandemic, but Rice makes it easy. They do have early decision. They don't have ED2, no early action, just ED. So if you apply ED, you need to make sure that this is the school that you want because that is binding. ED rate is about 19%. Regular decision is 8%.
Yeah, here's the
And
catch, right? This is the catch.
well, it is tough, but if you have run the numbers and, if you have run the net price calculator and this is the place to be, that's the best way to show that you're interested in the school. Now, the problem is it's small. It's a small school.
Right. And they have athletes too. So they have a lot of sports. So
Exactly.
a lot of those spots are going to get taken up by athletes, I think.
Exactly. So I think they defer. Now, full disclosure, my daughter applied to Rice University. ED, this was her first choice, and she was deferred, not denied, as she says, not denied, but deferred. And I choose to believe that she would have gotten in. But you're right, it is full of athletes and a lot of other students that are being recruited in that first round. So I wouldn't be discouraged by that deferral. Testing, they are still test optional, but students who do submit test scores, SAT ranges the 25th to 75th percentile is 1500 to 1560.
Yeah.
ACT 34 to 36. So they do accept self-reported test scores. They have interviews. They're recommended, not guaranteed. You have the ability to interview with a current senior at the school. One of the things I do like about this, it's about 50% men and women, evenly split. The student body is 14% international, still 36% from Texas, and the remaining 50% from other states. It is a diverse campus, 38% Asian, 50% white, 19% Hispanic or Latino, 12% Black or African American, and 2% American Indian, Alaskan Native, or Hawaiian. We talked about this, you can change your major. Like if you apply to go into engineering, you can always change once you get there. They really are flexible with that on their application. Some of the things that are unique to Rice is the Rice box.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to mention the rice box.
Yeah. And it's funny. So listeners, you'll have, as part of your application, you'll have, your main personal statement. They have 2 college specific essays, and it's why Rice and why your major. But then they also have the Rice box. And this is a photo or an image that you can upload, and it can be of anything. It can be a drawing. It can be a photograph that you took. It can literally be anything. And it just gives them an insight as to who you are. This is not going to sway your decision. They say, really don't sweat it. It's it's not going to get you in, and it's not going to keep you out. The only thing they do suggest is don't send in a picture of rice. It's not as clever as students think it is. Really, it could be anything, just not
not
that.
Rice University, but like actual rice.
Like a bowl of rice, or
yeah.
yes, or
Yeah, that's probably been done. They heard that joke. Yeah.
Yes, just
No
stop
chopsticks.
right now. No, they would rather see, a picture of your pet gerbil than another bowl of rice.
Okay, gotta get a gerbil.
Yeah, they're kind of cute, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for counselor teacher recommendations, and really the only differences as far as applying is going to be for the School of Music and Architecture, where you'll have the additional portfolio or audition. So who would Rice be good for? So this is a school for strong leaders. So your athletes are not going to get a break on the academics. You need to have the academic chops to get to this school, and they're looking for leaders. They want to see students who have made an impact in their home communities and their high school or something like that. Students who are interested in improving their communities and who would benefit from a collaborative environment. So this is not a cutthroat experience, where everyone's shooting for, one golden ring. They are a student body that works hard and also has fun. They have strong connections. Students who are looking for a diverse community and want the opportunity to explore different programs. So if you're interested in, biomedical engineering and Spanish language, this would be a good place.
Yeah, or even I was seeing combinations like, art history and chemical engineering, or things like that. That you wouldn't normally put together. It's you hardly ever get an opportunity to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's really a great place to learn for the sake of learning, and not just to grab that brass ring. Students who like sports, because they do have a lot of sports, and 75% of their students are still participating in intramural or club sports. Students tend to be friendly, quirky, yet supportive, and just nice. The place is filled with nice people, and even the staff and faculty. When we first visited Rice, it was in July of the pandemic summer in 2021. And so the campus was really quiet. They were doing in-person visits, but I can't tell you, as we were walking around the campus on our own after official tours, how many staff just stopped us and just to chat and make sure we were having a good time and where to go and visit. It was a really friendly place, which I shouldn't be surprised, but when you look at the quality and how high powered the academics are, you might assume that comes at a price, and it doesn't at this school.
Yeah, no, it sounds like he really did, William Rice really did achieve his dream despite being murdered by his valet. And that gives hope to all of us, I think.
Yeah. Well, another reason not to have a valet. Right?
I know. That's another thing I read that and I was like, yeah, I guess it's good. I don't have that's the problem with having too much help. So I don't have a butler or valet or maid or anything. So hopefully
you and I are going to live long, healthy lives.
Happy lives. Right.
That's the big takeaway. Yes.
Yeah. No, it seems like such an amazing school. But like, I feel like it's one of those things where it's like got so many opportunities and so much money, and yet so few students are going to be able to access it. And that's from a financial perspective. I just mean from an opportunity perspective.
But the nice thing is, and this is what I like about the school, I think they recognize that and they are working to make changes. They are growing their student body. That's what I like about the school. And it it is smaller than you would expect, but they're working on growing. And I love that because we hear that all the time. Why not? You have this huge endowment.
Right.
Put your money where your mouth is. And I feel like this school is doing it.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I just, I guess it's one of those things where you feel like you're kind of looking out at it from the outside of the fence, I think a little bit, because the kind of students that, are going to gain admission are certainly deserving of it, but they're not most students, they're not like your everyday kid, but yet your everyday kid could benefit so much from a Rice education, I think. So,
Yeah, and you know what another thing I like about this school is they are just so generous with their financial aid. And I'll give you an example of one family that was looking at schools that meet need. And just to give you an idea of the range, Rice University came in with a package that would have been about $16,000 a year, versus another top 20 university that was coming in at $50,000 a year. So there is that range. And I feel like Rice can be a terrific opportunity. Again, no doubt for the right kid.
right.
But they are test optional. So I don't want students to be intimidated by those test scores, because not everyone is submitting test scores. But you have to have made an impact in your community. I mean, it is, you have to have the background. You've got to have the rigor.
Right.
You have to have the impact. They're looking for student leaders. So it's probably an option for more students than students realize. Don't be frightened off by the sticker price. But do recognize it's a smaller school. It's not a 20,000 student body.
Right, they just don't have as many spots. No, I would hope that, maybe other schools would look at what Rice is doing, that is successful, and try to, replicate some of those elements, because it seems like they have really wonderful outcomes.
Yeah, they do. And I don't think I shared this. So speaking of outcomes, the median earnings across all majors for students is roughly 87,000. For those comp sci students, it's
Yeah,
172,000. So
yikes.
crazy outcomes for students. Now that does also include, the oboe performer and the comp sci student in there. So there's a range, but it's a great school. It has a lot to offer. And for being such a small university, I mean, to have the architecture, to have the music program, to have the engineering, it's got a lot. It's a terrific, terrific school. Again, one of my favorites.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. I would love to go visit it someday. Maybe, not in August, but
I don't recommend it. All right, Lisa. Well, thank you for joining in the conversation about Rice. And yes, highly recommend this place.
Friends, on Monday's episode, I'm going to share how I evaluate if a student has selected a good topic for their personal statement. I have about a dozen plus questions I ask when I'm helping a student decide if they're selecting a topic for their essay that will bring them to life. I have a feeling this is going to really help a lot of our listeners. I'm excited to share it with you. We'll have part 3 of Lisa's interview with Eric Newell, the Associate Vice Chancellor at East Carolina for almost a decade now. And they're talking about the correlation between student engagement in college and student success in college. I close you out with something I've already shared in this podcast, but I want to reinforce it. One way you reinforce something is to repeat it. I want to go back to what Dean Janet Rapley, the former dean at Princeton from 2003 to 2018. Rapley was also the dean of admission at Wellesley from 91 to 2003, and she was an associate director of admission at Bowdoin College from 86 to 91. In addition to that, she also worked in the admission offices of Stanford and Williams, 2 colleges that she both graduated from. So that's a lot of experience at the nation's most selective colleges. And I love this quote from Rapley, and I want to close out with it. We care about how you write because how you write is a reflection of how you think, and how you think is important to us. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.